Welcome to Tribe Journal. My name is JP Katz. I'm your host today, and we're fortunate to have Dr. Rosmarin, who's joined us from the realms of Boston here during the COVID-19 virus, and it's the initial stages here. And what better time to prepare ourselves for anxiety than before this thing really takes off. So I'm going to just read a basic abstract here and give a brief introduction and explain who Dr. Rosmarin is, just in case you don't know. So in the span of just a few days, our society has become completely unmoored, panic-stricken, and obsessed with fear. We check and recheck social media and news feeds that inundate and overwhelm us with information about COVID-19, much of which is neither helpful nor accurate. We see images of the supermarket lines, they're out the door, and empty shelves triggering and the stockpiling of household goods and supplies. And last week's mass equity sell-offs wrought more havoc on the markets than we've seen since 1987 or even earlier. In decades past, such extreme responses did not occur even during times of war. It's not news that Americans tend to run anxious. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, nearly 20% of adults have an anxiety disorder each year, but it is novel to realize how vulnerable we are to outright madness. Here we are with Dr. David Rosmarin for a brief presentation, followed by an engaging discussion about how to manage anxiety in a challenging time. Just by way of introduction, when Abraham was given the command to do bris milah, to have a bris, when Hashem commanded him, so he went to the yeshiva of Shem Va'aver. He went to this yeshiva to understand medically what's to expect. What do we expect from this procedure that he's going to have? That was basically his question. The Mishnah tells us to measure the reward against the loss of a mitzvah, what it's going to cost, what the reward will be. And we certainly have a tremendous mitzvah ahead of us to exercise our trust in God and to develop that wonderful relationship with God. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to learn the chachma of psychology behind the fighting, the managing of anxiety that so many people have. Dr. Rosmarin, PhD, ABPP, and I'm sure many other initials that are left out of here, is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and founder and director of the Center for Anxiety. Dr. Rosmarin's clinical work and research have received media attention from ABC, NPR, Scientific American, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. Without further ado, Dr. Rosmarin.
Thanks, JP. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm going to jump right in. So for the past several years, long before all this COVID-19 business, this crisis, anxiety has been on the rise in a very dramatic way in the United States. And I'm just going to provide a little bit of context. Prior to last week, every given year in the United States of America, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH, nearly 1 in 5 adults across the country has a full-blown anxiety disorder. That means that they're significantly impaired or distressed by their anxiety. And over the lifetime, it's 2 in 5, so 40%. Among teens, it's even higher. Every given year, it's 1 in 3. So if you have a class of, 30 kids or so, you're looking at 10 who have significant anxiety. But the bigger concern isn't just the prevalence, it's the severity. Prior to COVID-19, nearly 1 in 4 adults who have an anxiety issue have severe symptoms. So that's about 1 in 20 people nationally. 5% of the population are actually incapacitated or potentially suicidal because of their levels of anxiety. And speaking of suicide, that's the second leading cause of death in this country. If you didn't know that, for individuals aged 10 to 34, more young people die from suicide every year than cancer, heart disease, stroke, AIDS, birth defects, pneumonia, and influenza, pre-COVID-19, bad joke, combined, and chronic lung disease, in fact. Just to make that a little bit more quantified, it's about 9% of college students have tried to take their lives today, healthy college students. That was a study in 2018, about 65,000 students on 108 campuses. And every day in the nation, there are more than 3,000 suicide attempts by high school students. All of that was prior to COVID-19. I was inundated. My program in New York, the Center for Anxiety, we see more than 1,000 new patients a year, and we're relatively small. And the levels of anxiety are through the roof. And now it's just gone completely bananas. People are totally unmoored, panic-stricken, obsessed with fear. Behaviorally, like JP said before, we're checking and rechecking supermarket lines. We see a literal crash in the markets. I mean, that could have implications for months, if not years. So why is it that we're so anxious? I mean, I understand all of a sudden why we're anxious to some degree, but why are we having such an extreme reaction to COVID-19? And most importantly, what can we do about it? So first thing is to recognize that human beings have this innate fight or flight system. And that's a good thing because it motivates and summons your internal resources when you're threatened. Years ago, I remember stepping off of a curb in New York on 34th Street. And I was on my phone at the time, which I should not have been, and I wasn't paying attention. And I heard, and then I saw an MTA bus careening towards me at like 50 miles an hour. I decided to flee and not fight the bus. And I darted out of the way. And I had this incredible rush of adrenaline into my bloodstream from these glands that sit on top of the kidneys, straight into the bloodstream. Increase oxygenated blood circulating through my body, increase oxygen intake in order to power that, lots of muscle tone, increased muscle tone, fast twitch muscle fibers, blood from the extremities went in. I actually felt a little bit tingly in my hands afterwards, felt a little bit dizzy afterwards because my visual system was augmented due to pupil dilation. And all of that happened in a nanosecond in order to give me the power, the ability to get out of the way of the bus. And I'm very grateful for my fight or flight response because I wouldn't be here otherwise. But that's a normal, healthy thing. Anxiety, though, is neither necessary nor healthy. It's the experience of a fear response when you don't have an immediate threat. It's having that feeling, that adrenal gland rush when there isn't an immediate threat. When your adrenal glands fire, even though there's no reason, that's called anxiety. Now, when people come to my office to complain about anxiety or to deal with anxiety, they have the exact same symptoms. They have heart palpitations, right? Because their heart's increasing. They have shallow breathing, difficulty breathing. They have muscle tension. They have numbness and tingling. They are stomach upset because blood is being diverted away from the stomach. They have heightened sensitivity to light. They feel dizzy. And all of those are basically that makes sense because it's the fight or flight system. It's the same thing. So when we falsely judge something to be an immediate threat, even though it isn't, we trigger this unnecessary rush of adrenaline, and the result is anxiety. Okay? That's the basic physiology of it. So why are we so anxious in general, and then especially today? Why are we, to put it differently, why are our fight or flight systems so trigger happy? We trigger them in a hot flash, and we trigger them to a high extent. So psychological science is pretty clear about this at this point. Anxiety comes very clearly when people can't tolerate a situation that's uncontrollable and uncertain. If you can tolerate situations that you're out of control and that you're not sure what's going to happen next, you're not going to have an anxiety response. But if you can't handle having a lack of agency or a lack of information, then you're going to have anxiety. The more we need to feel in control, the more anxiety we're going to feel. And even before COVID-19, we were obsessed with control. There were predictions before COVID-19, financial markets, political elections, professional sports outcomes, the weather. And even though those predictions are almost always wrong, people still scrutinize them tens, if not hundreds of times each week, because we can't tolerate uncertainty. We actually would prefer to predict the future and be dead wrong than to admit that we have no clue what's going to happen next. That's American society today, pre-COVID-19. We also see it in our avoidance of pain. In the United States, over-the-counter analgesics like Tylenol, Advil, and aspirin, we spend $5.4 billion a year on those over-the-counter painkillers. That's more than everything that is produced, the gross national product of the entire sovereign nation of Fiji. Huge, an incredible amount of money. And the reason is because we're so dead set on avoiding pain because it reminds us that we're not in control. We're also allergic to having intense emotions. Today, people have normal mood fluctuations. They feel a little bit tense, a little bit down, a little anxious. They immediately say something's wrong with me because they can't control their emotions because, hey, we're human. And that happens sometimes. And we immediately try to diagnose ourselves, get ourselves on medication, and try to avoid and suppress any intense emotions and any behaviors that we're not happy with. We medicalize normal mood states. We expect our emotions to be even-keeled, and we can't accept the fact that sometimes they just get a little intense because, like I said, on a good day, that's normal. The whole thing comes down to control. We are obsessed with being in control, and that was prior to COVID-19. As of last week, it's now official that nothing is controllable and predictable. Nothing. Anxiety has gone through the roof for one simple reason. Our society is struggling mightily against accepting the reality that we are not in control and we cannot predict what's going to happen. Most people who are not anxious today have a different problem. They're minimizing the threat. They don't understand exactly what we're facing. I want to be very clear. There's a big difference between feeling revved up when we lack control versus when we're genuinely threatened. If people are genuinely threatened and they're ramped up, that's normal, like we spoke about before. If your adrenal glands fire when it's unclear or ambiguous, such as like it is now, it's not an immediate threat, there's only a remote possibility of danger, that's unnecessary anxiety. But if you're not concerned at all with any real threat, then that in some ways is a more serious problem. And there is a real concern today to some degree, and people who don't accept that and understand it, well, something's amiss. I spoke yesterday with Dr. David Palkovitz from Yeshiva University. I'm giving a program there with him tomorrow for YU. And he told me that he has several friends who are highly regarded infectious disease specialists, and they're all walking around very solemn and very concerned. The reason is because they have an acute perception of what's going on. And they understand that there's a tremendous danger that we're all facing. Please don't make any mistake. COVID-19 is potentially deadly, and thousands, if not tens of thousands of people could die because of this. If people aren't concerned about COVID-19, they're in the clouds. And if they aren't carefully adhering to CDC or local government guidelines, they're endangering themselves and potentially other people. It's very clear. But that being the case, what's our solution today? Because how can we manage our anxiety in this challenging time? It seems that there are only two options: either deny the concern and live in the clouds, or live with paralyzing anxiety. I think there's a middle path, and I'll try to outline it. In reality, life is a lot less controllable and certain than most people realize, having nothing to do with COVID-19. Try a simple exercise with me right now. Lift your arm and wave your fingers. That's it, wave your fingers. Now, you can stop. There are so many physiological, biological, neurological, chemical, and other processes, all have to work perfectly, precisely, well, not perfectly, but precisely in order for you to lift your arm and wave your fingers. And that's a very simple task. How many of those processes are under our control? Not very many. Maybe the choice to lift up your hand and move it, but beyond that, I don't control my blood, I don't control my oxygen, I don't control my neurological system, I don't control my neurotransmitters, I'm not controlling gravity. And if that's the case for a simple activity, then imagine something more complicated like playing piano, or making dinner, or speaking, or writing, or conversing with somebody. And furthermore, if you think about it and step back even further, every major factor, almost every major factor that shapes our experience is completely beyond our control. How many people on the call today chose when, whether, and where they would be born? Please raise your hands. People don't choose their parents or their economic or social emotional circumstances. We emerge into life, we emerge into a period of history involuntarily with absolutely no control over it. And the more you think about it, the more it becomes apparent that we have very little control over the most important factors that shape our lives. We live in this privileged and technologically advanced world, and it makes us forget that we are just not in charge. But more than lacking control, we're inherently vulnerable. We've been at risk for viral outbreaks for decades. It might not be pleasant to think about, but we're also vulnerable to a lot of other things like nuclear terrorism and hostile military invasions and mass declines in national food supply and absolute currency devaluations, which who knows, God forbid what could happen. Sudden rising in sea levels. Might I remind you what happened a couple of years ago? Radiation due to an astronomical event. Okay, that hasn't happened in a while, but it could.
Doctor, I feel that our anxiety level is going up as you continue to.
I'm doing it for a reason. The truth is, it's miraculous that such events don't occur more frequently. And this crisis that we're facing, we need to step back and accept that there are limits to what we can control and what we know. And that's the nature of being human. We're not invincible. We're not impervious to risk. And we have to practice humility, and we have to make peace with that fact. So practically speaking, what can we do? I think a lot will come up in the Q&A, but I'll give you one tool, which is that we have to fully recognize the dangers of COVID-19 are very real. They're very real. And we have to accept that our sense of certainty and safety is an illusion. It is just not true. But once we accept that and we make peace with it, we can emerge with inner strength. I'll give you an exercise in a bit. I want to say some things that we should definitely not do. There are behaviors that we give us a false sense of security, and those make our anxiety worse. And they also make the situation worse. My favorite was a couple of weeks ago when everyone was buying these face masks, and actually the U.S. Surgeon General Jerome Adams got on Twitter and said, stop buying face masks because it could actually increase the risk, the national risk, which means people were engaging in a behavior that was purely aimed at reducing their anxiety and giving them an illusion of control, even though it actually made them more susceptible to risk. I think it's because if condensation appears on the outside of a mask, the virus can actually attach itself. I don't know, I'm not an epidemiologist, but that's what I understand. Something like that.
When you breathe in, it can go in through the sides.
Goes in through the sides, it's not effective, whatever it is.
Cough that it should get absorbed by the mask.
But more significantly, we have these market fears, and if those downward trends continue, they ultimately could lead to national or global recession, which is going to create greater vulnerability to a lot of catastrophic events, not the least of which is actually taxing the medical system further, which would make it harder for us to deal with the current situation. Our emotional and behavioral responses might be creating more damage than the virus. I think that the way that we are handling this as a society, as a whole, is actually potentially more problematic than the COVID-19. Part of it also is being more flexible and embracing uncertainty more. We have to accept and understand and embrace it. The situation might last months. We don't know how long this is going to be. It could be that it'll be over next week. There'll be a vaccine. It'll be around. Maybe the weather will change and all of a sudden the thing will go poof. Or maybe it will last until August, like our president said earlier on today. It seems hard to stay sane when so much is unknown, but actually it's an opportunity to just say, you know what? That's not for me to figure out. It's just going to be what it's going to be. And that's when we can be emotionally resilient. The current crisis is calling upon us to recognize and embrace that nothing was ever clear, nothing was ever certain. But in fact, we're human beings and we don't have to know anything with certainty. We don't have to be in control. We just have to live in the moment, do the best that we can day to day. And if we do that, we can dance through the challenge. I want to give in some more practical, something more concrete than I have already. What's the gold standard for treatment of anxiety? The answer is called exposure therapy. And exposure therapy is a pretty simple process. We encourage people to face their fears until they come to a place of acceptance. We don't force them, of course, we encourage. Years ago, just a quick example, I had a rabbi friend, and he confided in me, he said, I have a fear of heights, I'm kind of embarrassed, but what do I do? So I said, okay, I want you to go up to the highest point you can think of, somewhere with a straight view all the way down. I want you to peer over the edge for as long as you possibly can until your anxiety goes away. And he says, well, hold on, I'm going to have a panic attack. I'm like, great, panic. He's like, but what if I, lose bladder control? I'm like, it's probably not going to happen, but hey, let it go. And he said, you're crazy, buddy. Are you kidding me? This is what you tell your patients, And I said, if you want to overcome your anxiety and your fear of heights, that's the only way I know how to do it. Face your fear. Now, do you know why I did it before? I was speaking before, JP Katz? Now it's clear? Okay. So I said, let go. Stop fighting it. He said, "You're nuts." A year later, I get an email from him. He had come back from a trip to San Francisco. He went through the entire Golden Gate Bridge on foot. He said he was looking over the rail. He felt he was going to vomit. He was shaking most of the time. And at the end, he felt so comfortable and so positive because he had stood up to his fear. And he said, I'm not going to let this beat me.
Incredible.
In other cases, it's even more complicated. I remember seeing a single female in her late 20s who came with very significant obsessive compulsive disorder. We mapped out all of her fears, and she had a whole page. There were literally 70 different compulsions she was engaging in on a week-to-week basis. She had not left her house, in fact, except to go to her place of work and home in 2 years prior to coming to me.
Wow.
And she noticed her thing was she had this thought in her mind that she might have an aneurysm. And she had been to a neurologist. There was no aneurysm. She was perfectly fine, but she couldn't shake this thought in her mind. And in order to control that, as opposed to letting go, she was avoiding any situation where she might feel anxious. She might feel a little bit uncomfortable because she thought that her levels of tension would increase her blood pressure and then her brain would explode and that would be bad.
She locked herself in. Wow.
So what?
She locked herself in.
She basically locked herself in and her workload became very small. I pushed her so hard in treatment. She was encouraged every day to face her fears. She was going to the supermarket. She was in a car. She had to get on a plane. At one point, she literally stayed overnight somewhere without her cell phone. And she said, well, what if I die? I'm like, well, someone will find you. And she had to face that fear. I figured it was an unlikely event, which, she made it. She embraced the possibility in her mind of her imminent death every day. And she said to me, it's the hardest thing she did. And the process took over a year. In the end, not only is she free of, in her case, it was obsessive compulsive disorder. She's happily married, mother, a whole bunch of kids, doing extremely well. The crazy PS on the story is that one of her children actually had a very serious brain condition at birth and ended up having to go through some pretty invasive surgeries. And thank God he was fine. But more importantly, she handled it beautifully. It was because she had faced it and she said, I don't have control over this. I don't have control over life. And she made peace with it, that she was able to handle that subsequent stressor. And she marched through it. She called me up once in the middle of the stressor. And I said, maybe you give me some tips because you're handling this so beautifully. I don't know how you're doing it.
Drew from the past experiences.
Exactly. She had faced it and she had accepted it and she knew. I'll give you other examples. When people have panic disorder and they come to my office, what do you think we do? We get them to panic. We have these little straws. I don't know if I have one at home here. I'm stuck at home, right? So we have these little straws that we give people and they breathe through them. It's very uncomfortable. It won't kill you unless you have COPD or anything, in which case, bad idea. But they breathe through it. They have constricted breathing. They're very uncomfortable. And our goal is to help them gather up the courage to face the fact that they're going to feel uncomfortable and they might die. And they don't. When people are excessively shy and socially anxious, we encourage them to get up in front of a group of people and make a toast or to give a speech.
Oh, interesting.
In fact, is anybody anxious on the call? You're welcome to take the floor right now. In these and other examples, the method's very simple. We're helping people embrace the unknown and to give up control.
That's great.
So my clinic, I mentioned before, it's called the Center for Anxiety. And when I started it, people said, hey, it should really be Center for Anxiety Treatment, Center for Anxiety Relief. And I said, no, it's got to be the Center for Anxiety because we help people to become comfortable experiencing their anxiety. That's the whole approach.
Not to defeat it, but to become comfortable.
That's how they defeat it, is by becoming, the only way to defeat anxiety is by accepting it.
Interesting.
And our results are compelling. And we're not the only ones who do this. This is not my method. This is a tried and tested method. But in our study, in our patients though, 97% of our patients have clinically significant reduction in anxiety by the end of treatment. And in 4 out of 5 cases, even with mild to moderate symptoms, those are below the clinical threshold after just 7 sessions. So when people face their anxiety, even in a small amount, they can do a lot. Okay, about COVID-19, of course, we don't have people facing their fears by going into crowds. I'm not having people, shake hands with people, of course. But I am encouraging people, all of my patients and also my staff, to envision what it would be like for them to, God forbid, get the virus. It's important to get ourselves mentally to a place of acceptance and mental preparedness. That's far more psychologically adaptive than trying to avoid something that's out of our control.
Interesting. Is that
Okay, I have couple concluding points, and then we can
like a
open it up.
worst case scenario? That's what you're saying? In other
Yes,
words, imagine.
correct. To think about what's the worst case scenario and to get to a place of it's just out of my hands and I have to accept that fact.
Wow. I would think the opposite, right? That whatever you do, block it. Don't think of it. But you're saying take it head on.
Yeah, there was an interesting study done years ago where people were watching. They were brought into a laboratory and they watched some very violent scenes from a movie. I think the movie is called The Deer Hunter. I haven't seen it, but I hear it's a pretty bad one. And there's some scenes there very gruesome. And there were two conditions. In the first condition, they said just accept the thoughts, accept what you're seeing, don't force it out of your mind, and then let it go. And then the other condition it was block it out, think happy thoughts, think about roses, don't let yourself have that distress. And after 5 minutes, who do you think was more anxious? The people who were blocking it out. The people who accepted it, the people who learned to just accept how they felt and regulate themselves, they were more peaceful.
Interesting.
Just to conclude on a more spiritual note, if you look at Sifrei Chazal, Musar, Hasidus, if you look at what the Jewish texts of the ages have to say, there's one theme that comes up, which is called bitachon, or trust in God. It's no accident that clinical science is pointing to the importance of giving up control and accepting life, because that is trust in God. And if you look at, like I said, texts from the ages, whether it's the duties of the heart, Philip's Levovos, or other ones, that's exactly what's written. To put it bluntly, either we believe that we're in control or that God's in control. And recognizing, not just intellectually when we're reading, but actually in the moment and really feeling it, that's the first step to building real faith inside of ourselves. We have a tremendous spiritual opportunity today, I think. In fact, better than we did even last week or the week before. We don't need to know what's going on. We don't need to be right all the time. We don't even need to be calm all the time. What we do need is to accept that we're not in control. And that's not just a psychological message. I think it's a spiritual message. So if we want to thrive and manage anxiety in these challenging times, there's one solution, which is to give up. As they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, to let go and to let God.
Let go and let God. I like that.
So thank you. Those are my remarks.
Thank you. Maybe we can jump in with a few follow-up Q&A. That'd be great. Thanks so much.
Great.
Just listening to you speak, a few things came to mind. Also, I had a few notes that I jotted down beforehand. What is, the misfires that happen? You mentioned the misfires, that our system will misfire, and that's what causes anxiety. Anxiety is a bad thing. Usually that system is there to protect us. It's there as an asset, a resource. But when it misfires, it's a bad thing. It causes anxiety. What is the key to first identifying the misfires when it's happening? And then secondly, how would you advise us to calm the system? How do we is there like a trigger we can shut off this system? Is there like a knob we can just, turn down? Like how would you advise us to, quiet down the system when it is misfiring? Yeah,
the first question is the more important one. How do you recognize when it's happening? And it's pretty simple. If you're not being chased by a saber-toothed tiger or being, if you're swimming and, there isn't a great white shark which is after you, it's probably anxiety. Most of the things that we experience today are anxiety. There are life-threatening situations that people have, but they're usually at least 1 or 2 or 3 steps removed. Even COVID is mostly anxiety. That's not to say that we shouldn't be prepared. We have to take steps, like I was very clear to say, but we're not talking about an imminent, immediate threat that requires a release of adrenaline. It's a very powerful substance, and it's only going to secrete into you if you really need it, ideally. If that's once or twice or 3 times a life, that's all you need it for.
So it's the intellect, it's the balance of the intellect versus the heart, so to speak. You have the heart that's pumping adrenaline, and you have the intellect that's recognizing, wait, there's no great white shark. Like, why is my heart doing this? There's almost that conversation. Maybe you can speak that out for us.
Yeah, I think there is a conversation to be had. That's sort of a clinical technique called cognitive therapy, where people are taught ways to speak to themselves more effectively. And I think that can be helpful, but it's not as helpful as exposure therapy. You talked about turning down the knob. The only strategy I know is not to turn down the knob, it's to let the knob go.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean by that?
Sometimes you just gotta let yourself feel anxious. Don't fight it. Just embrace it. Let it happen.
Let it flow.
Let it flow and let it come and let it go. When people fight the adrenal response, you actually feel it more because you're giving yourself something more to fight against, as opposed to just being like, okay, you got me. Like, it's going to be a rough 5 minutes. I'm going to breathe, and it's going to be what it is, and then we're going to move on with the day.
Call timeout, step aside a little bit, catch your breath, like that. That's
yeah, but the timeout isn't meant to calm you down. It's meant to just give you a moment to feel anxious. In fact, when people have a timeout, I want them to feel more anxious. Don't distract yourself with your computer or with what you're doing. Just be mindful of it. Focus on it, feel it, let yourself experience it, and let go.
Like a wave, let it just crash over you.
Wave is a great analogy. It's exactly it. It's a wave.
Very nice. Okay, great.
Coughing.
So let it go.
I can't do anything about it.
So top 3 tips for people who are particularly nervous. You know, they have identified after 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years, 80, whatever, however old they are, I am a particularly nervous person. What would be the top 3 things that you would advise them, you would tell them, you know, to be aware of? Or
yeah, as I said before, I think facing your fear is number 1. It's probably also number 2 and number 3. The more we can, let go and embrace it, that's going to be the way to do it. Now, there are certain things you can do just in general. Self-care is going to help take the edge off in general. I think that's good. If people have an exercise routine, if they have a good diet, if they have sleep is huge. Of those 3, exercise, diet, and sleep, I would say sleep is number 1. So, and related to that is not checking your phone. Like, we should be turning off our phones an hour before. Normally I say a half an hour. During COVID, it's an hour.
Oh, wow.
Take your phone, turn it off an hour before you're going to bed.
Do what? What should we do, Doc? That's an hour before bed. Oh, no.
Get a book, talk to someone, have a conversation.
What?
But,
conversation?
Checking social media, checking WhatsApp chats, like checking the news an hour before bed, like, no. Nothing is going to happen between, whatever. Let's say you go to bed at 11, 10 p.m. till whatever time you wake up the next morning, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is, nothing is going to happen that you need to know about. And if there is, then someone will call you. Like, it's going to be okay. Let go, at least for those 8, 9 hours.
Shabbos is the best for that. Shabbos is the best for that. You unplug.
Honestly, I tell my colleagues in academia just about Shabbos. Let's chat about that. And you mentioned it. My colleagues in academia think I'm nuts. So I'm like, I'm off the grid. And they're like, how do you publish anything? How do you present? Like, how do you run a lab? Like, are you crazy? And I said to them, I also say to them back, I don't know how you do it. I get a break and I'm offline and I get to think one day a week and be with my family. And I think Shabbos has been a great prep for COVID because there are times that we just have to be disconnected and we have to be. And you know what? That's kind of what's happening now. No one can be as productive these days. People are spending more time with their families. That's often a stressor for people.
Okay. Here's another one, a question here. Transformation, any balmoser knows, it takes a lifetime. To really transform oneself takes a lifetime. Here we are with one of the most unique situations that humanity has seen. Not just the fact that this, COVID-19 is running rampant, but also the fact that it's happening in an internet digital age. It's happening in an airplane age. It seems like, in light of what you're saying, this is one of the best opportunities that people who want to grow might be faced with is this thing COVID-19, and in some way the silver lining. Maybe you can speak that out. How just relatively speaking, how does COVID-19 play into what is the opportunity here that we all have with COVID-19?
I think there are a lot of opportunities actually. Specific to anxiety though, I think it's similar to what was said before, but I guess I'll just try to pivot off of it. A week ago, we could pretend that, that we were in control and that we knew what was going to happen next. But now we can't do that anymore. So what's really just happened is we are better positioned to accept it because we can't deny it. If we take this opportunity to recognize and to become comfortable not knowing, not being in control, we're going to be so much more resilient for the rest of our lives. And we can teach that message to our kids. You said it takes a lifetime to change. Sometimes, but sometimes people can change in an instant or during a difficult time in their lives. I've seen that for sure, where people make major changes in a short period of time because they're very focused.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if people spend 3 minutes a day practicing acceptance, just practicing acceptance about the current situation for the next week, 2 weeks, for however long it lasts, I think that can have a transformative impact on them for the rest of their lives and make them more resilient. And I think that will also impact how their kids are affected. That could have a huge impact.
Interesting. Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay, 2 real quick questions, more logistic. And then we're going to open it up. We're going to take a look at some of the chat here. Okay, so what resources? I'm sorry. One question before we go there. What's the role of routine when it comes to anxiety?
Yeah, routine is another one I mentioned before: diet, exercise, and sleep. And I think right now we're still in the sort of like this week, the first week of it, first couple days. It's kind of like a snow day, and 1 day, 2 days, and then people are going to develop cabin fever pretty quickly. And I think it's going to be important within a week, certainly by Sunday, Monday, for people to have routines and for everyone in the family to have a routine, to have an idea of where people should be. I think the routine should not be overly taxing and also not overly lax. Instead of doing 3 or 4, instead of doing 5 or 6 or 7 hours of class, for example, for kids, I'd like to see them doing 1 or 2 hours in the morning, 1 or 2 hours in the afternoon. But on a pretty regular schedule, starting at, say, 9 a.m. instead of 8, whenever it is. And then, starting again at 1 p.m., having a break in the middle, doing an activity. There has to be a lot more thought, which we spend going into that, especially for people preparing for Pesach in the next couple of weeks. That's going to be another issue which we're going to have to face. So yeah, I do think we're going to have to manage that on a practical level. Exercise, take the clothing off of your treadmills. It's probably usually people have it like they've just dumped their stuff on it.
Oh, that's what that thing's for?
Set up a television in front of it or speakers. People might have to get Netflix subscriptions. I hate to make a recommendation like that, but I know that you didn't hear it from me. Seriously, and people have to, people have to do what they got to do in order to keep going during this really challenging time.
Great. Okay, 2 quick questions now. Well, number one, again, logistically, what resources exist for one who's feeling exceptionally vulnerable and needs help? By the way, no one panic. I'm going to ask Dr. Rosmarin, we can post it onto the website so that it'll be available if anyone wants to see it. But just, for part of the podcast here, what are some resources that people might have if when they're feeling exceptionally vulnerable?
Yeah, it's a really good question. For people who are currently in therapy and they either can't access their therapist because they can't go in for sessions, I think phone sessions or video, whether it's Zoom or whether it's Skype or FaceTime or WhatsApp or whatever, is fine. Our practice has been doing telehealth for years. In fact, I've at this point a small private practice. It used to be much larger. These days I do more administrative work. Almost entirely, I've been doing telehealth for the last 3-4 years. I think for people who don't, I think it's important for people to reach out for help if they need it. And even if it's a one-time consultation, hey, what should I do? How do I manage this? I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed. What do I do about one of my kids, one of the people who I'm living with, somebody who else I'm concerned about? This is not a time to say I'm going to do this by myself. We have to band together, and if people need help, they should reach out. In terms of specific resources, some people have EAP, some people have employee assistance programs. That might be a good time, although I know that a lot of them have been inundated. My office is always a resource. Center for Anxiety, www.centerforanxiety.org. And we have about 25 therapists in the New York area who are providing telehealth and also some in-person for higher risk cases at this time. So we're a resource, even if it's a one-time consult or if it's an ongoing thing, that's totally fine. And you'd be surprised who calls me. I always say, people, don't worry. Don't worry what the neighbors will think, because they're all in therapy too.
Right. That'd be great. And obviously friends and family, and maybe have one.
Yeah, of course. Reaching out to friends, family, people, of course. Social support is not to be, and also mentors. People have religious mentors. People have school mentors. It's a time to connect with people. And if that's going to tie you over and do the trick without a professional, great.
Okay, great. And then how do we spot the need for someone in our, immediate family or community, seeing someone whose anxiety level might be elevated, and how would you recommend approaching them that maybe they should, see a therapist or seek help?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think these days with COVID-19, it's hard for me to imagine anyone who doesn't need a little bit of support, to be perfectly honest. The only question is, what level of support do they need? Do they need self-care? Do they need mentorship? Do they need friendship? Do they need mentorship? Do they need professional consultation? Do they need actual ongoing therapy? Everybody's on that spectrum.
Sure.
Everyone. So the only question is, what do we need? Not who needs it. Got it.
Okay, great. I'm going to post a link here for anyone. We are going, I would imagine that there are, hold on one second. I would imagine that there are going to be, after a little bit of time, people are going to be going stir crazy. What we're doing is I'm trying to organize small chaburas, learning groups online, just to socialize, because if, a lot of our students are actually, they're living alone or maybe with one or two people, but to actually have online interaction with friends, there's a wide variety of topics, inspiring topics, yes, for women and yes, for men. And there's all sorts of topics that people will be engaging in. And there might be a leader of that group that would lead the discussion and learn things. So I'm going to put that in the notes here. It's on the chat. I'll put it on the website as well, on tribejournal.org. People feel free to fill it out, and it's not local to Boston per se. Feel free to join up, and we'll try to connect you to a group. We're now going to, by the way, Dr. Rosmarin, in case on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you. I feel bad that someone just joined the meeting now, but on behalf of everybody, I want to thank you for making the time. I know some people may have to go, but we want to just, first of all, as a group, say thank you very much for giving us your time, your expertise, and all these wonderful gems of wisdom. We're now going to turn to the chat and take a look at some of the questions that people have been chatting in. So here we go. I'm going to start with Sina. She's got her hand raised for at least like 30 minutes now. So I'm going to unmute you, Sina. I'm assuming you're not at your computer, so typing would be challenging. But welcome aboard, Sina.
Hi, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Thank you, doctor, so much for this evening. This was really very kind of you. I wanted to ask what you thought about mindfulness on a daily basis in this kind of situation, how you would use it.
It's a great question.
Or if you think it's valuable.
Yeah, it's a great question. Firstly, what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is a practice which was distilled from originally from Buddhism, although it has its roots actually in Judaism also. That's a whole other schmooze. But bottom line is it's a way of focusing on the moment and just focusing on what's in front of you, whether it's a physical sense or something you hear or something you see or something you taste, and trying to just focus on that and nothing else for a bit. And what a person does is they focus on, let's say I'm focusing on the feelings of my fingertips. So I focus on that, and then I have an extraneous thought that comes in, and I don't force it out. I just let it go, and then I come back to focusing on my fingertips. Now, It can be helpful if it's used correctly. The purpose of mindfulness is to be able to accept distress, to be able to focus on my distressing emotions and not to force them away. The ultimate goal of mindfulness, clinical science is very clear on this, is not to calm the mind and get yourself not thinking about distress. It's to be able to translate focusing on something benign into ultimately focusing on distress and letting it sit without forcing it out. That's the focus of it. So if people are using mindfulness to like think calm, think calm, think calm, think calm, bad thoughts go away. That is not helpful. That is just not helpful. And a lot of people do use it that way. But if people use it appropriately and are actually trained in it, it can be a very good resource.
So I've been trying to use it. And when like I get a little panicky about what's going on, and I have turned off all the news, I can't handle it anymore. But one of the things I thought about was when it starts coming in and getting into a mindful moment and thinking Hashem Hu Har Elokim. And I keep saying it over and over in my head because that lets me let go of it a little bit. And so I feel very good doing it. It just makes me feel like I'm giving it over. I just have to give it over.
That's exactly what I'm encouraging people to do.
Yeah.
If a person's focusing on the mindfulness and saying like, I'm focusing on something else, then they're really just trying to control it as opposed to I have no control and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds like you're doing a great job.
I'm trying. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your comments. Okay, we have some more chats over here. Do you have the chat there? Can you see that?
I do. Yeah, I just pulled it up.
Okay, wonderful. Question, Tamara, Mrs. Klumpus, how do I speak with my children about this and how can I help them face their fears?
That's a great question. Firstly, modeling is most important with kids. So kids will feel less anxious if you feel less anxious. Put it differently, if you can accept the current situation more, your kids will be more accepting. They're going to pick it up from you by osmosis, even if you're not in the same city. I've seen, don't even ask me, crazy stories about people who I've helped the parents and then like almost by magic, the kids get better. It's that's a whole schmooze in of itself also, but kids will pick up whatever is going on with their parents, certainly if you're living with them. So in terms of speaking to them about it, it's important to be clear that this is a dangerous situation and therefore we are not going to do X, Y, and Z. However, we can do A, B, and C. You can go outside, you can breathe the air, you can go down the block, but we cannot go to the playground. We're not going to touch the playground stuff because then there could be somebody who had the virus who has it. So there have to be certain rules that are clear. And I think as long as we're calm and we say this is okay, this isn't, and we, exude and explain to them. We can also explain to them for religious families, I think, to say God's in control. There have been difficult times in the past. He's gotten us through it. He's going to get us through this. I think those are very, very positive and important messages, really for us, frankly, but also for kids.
I think to make them feel safe. It's interesting. The Masorah that I've heard is that the most important thing is to make them feel safe, that kids should always feel safe. What are your thoughts on that? I think
of course. We all need to feel safe. The problem is with the adults, we kind of have to be more accepting of it and just sort of let it go. I think with kids, it's sort of easier for them to let go because they don't have as much control in the first place. So giving them more of a sense of safety makes sense.
Okay, great. I'm going to guess that this is a question, like acceptance commitment therapy question?
Yeah. That's Cassie. Great point. Yes, ACT or acceptance and commitment therapy teaches these concepts. This is very consistent with ACT.
Okay, great. I'm going to keep in mind here, there's 5 more minutes. If you can go over a little bit, I'm sure everyone would appreciate it. Is it okay? How much time?
We'll see how many people stick around, but yeah, okay.
All right, great. And maybe we can discuss having a follow-up. If
that'd probably be better than, but we can see.
Okay, so are you able to give these classes more on point? Okay. Obviously, precautions such as washing our hands and social distancing are fundamentally important for slowing the spread of COVID-19, but are other precautions such as stocking up on extra food and cleaning supplies, voluntary quarantine helpful for managing anxiety, or is it not helpful in the acceptance of COVID-19 and it works us up even more?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have seen no data to suggest that there is a food shortage. None. I haven't even heard rumors of it. The only reason there was a toilet paper shortage is because everyone else went out and bought it. And by the way, it's going to cause production issues because now people are overproducing, and then there's going to be issues with storage. Like the economics, the behavioral economics of what's happening with COVID-19 to me is the most fascinating, in some ways, the most debilitating aspect of what's going on. So I don't think stocking up makes sense. It seems to be that it's mediated by anxiety. It's a function of people's fears that are not based in reality. And therefore, I don't think it's helpful. You want to overbuy by 20% just in case? Okay, I could probably hear that, as justified. But if it's more than that, then that makes me wonder, like, what's really going on? So I think that's going to work us up more. I definitely think checking is going to work us up more. Selling equities will for sure work you up more. Oh my God. And by the way, Warren Buffett has been reported to say, when people are greedy, get fearful. And when people are fearful, get greedy. I'm not in the business of giving stock tips, but if anything, now's the time to buy. Everything's on sale.
Okay. Very good. Just by way of, I don't know if you've seen my video, we went to the supermarket, and we have some stock personnel that they were just saying it's just the food comes every single day, 6 days a week, every week, 6 days a week. We just can't stock it fast enough. So logistically, it doesn't seem to be an issue. It's all in private. I think we spoke to Rabbi Dr. Aldridge about that as well. It's in the private sector. So Stop and Shop is motivated to stock the shelves.
Sure.
However, I would imagine that there is an aspect of, if things do progress, it's good to be stocked up so you don't have to keep running to the supermarket every day, to have some level of inventory in your house to prevent, the unnecessary need to go out into the supermarket.
So like 20% more?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Okay, another question. Here we go. Getting the virus is one negative externality. But I think what a lot of us are so distressed by is the unraveling of society so quickly and drastically, all for legit reasons, but still deeply distressing. To your point of embracing lack of control in getting the virus and imagining that reality, probably just a flu for most young, healthy people. But how do we apply that to the realities of social distancing and isolation, quarantine, etc.? That's a reality we're already experiencing, and that is inducing anxiety. How do we process that, especially with Passover coming?
Okay, so I'm seeing sort of two comments or questions. The first is the virus is one thing, and then the unraveling of society is another thing. And I totally agree. I think the unraveling of society is actually more distressing than the virus itself. The fact that we are responding to this in ways that let's just take you back a couple of years before I was even born, to the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, literally the world almost blew up. We were very close to a nuclear war with the USSR. And all the political analysts will tell you that the Cuban Missile Crisis was a near miss. But what happened? They taught kids to go under the desks and to duck for cover, and everyone went home. Now it's like stockpiling, sell-offs, everybody's checking their phone every minute. So yeah, I totally agree with you that the behavioral and the emotional aspects of it. With regards to social distancing, we really don't have a choice. I mean, we have to remain isolated. We can't be in groups. It's definitely not good for our society and probably not good for us personally. But here we are at 10 o'clock at night. There's still 50 people on a call. In some ways, my wife said to me a very innocent comment. She's like, the world just got very small. And it's true. People are much more connected. People aren't going to work. Call up, people in your family you haven't spoken to. Call up friends. WhatsApp them individually, not only in groups, but also individually, and keep those relationships strong. I think, it's tricky with the Pesach, with the Seder coming up. People might have more quiet Sedarim than they normally do. They might go quicker than they normally do. They might get to bed sooner than they normally would, but because we won't have, most people won't have access to technology on that day. But that doesn't mean that we have to be social distance does not mean isolation.
Great. I'm going to skip the next couple because it seems like more medical than psychiatry, psychology. So Also, Netflix. Last I checked, you weren't a connoisseur on movies and whatnot.
Yeah, I was not recommending anything on Netflix. I was just saying that if you want to exercise, then we want to listen to music. Gotta we have to stay fit and we have to stay healthy.
Cheryl, I'm going to unmute you if you want to ask your question now.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, this is Cheryl Adler. Dr. Rosmarin, thank you so much. And to both of you, this is so helpful and extraordinary. I also believe there's so much opportunity and that Hashem's given us this big reset button to humanity right now in a way that's very interesting. My question, when you talked about keeping the language around our children, making them feel safe, that seems very intuitive to me. And but there's always that little, and this was in me even prior to this happening. And any of us who've experienced any traumas in our lives, we know that experience and that dichotomy of saying you're going to be safe, it's going to be okay, and then we have that little thing in the back of our heads, what if it's not, right? What if somebody we know does get ill and it doesn't go well? What if, how does a child be told? I mean, this is getting into that category of overthinking for sure, because the likelihood is that it will be fine. But I just wanted to hear your comments about how you mitigate against that knowledge that we tell them they're going to be safe, we do all these different things, and then there's that, what if it's not? And how does a child cope and survive through that?
Great. Now, if a child is asking those questions, then I would answer them as if to say, we don't know what's going to be. We don't know whether there will be consequences to this, but ultimately that's not our decision, and we have to accept that, and ultimately it'll be okay, whether it's the specific outcome or the global outcome for the world. If it's us who are asking that question and not the child, I wouldn't go there. I think that's modeling anxiety to the kid, and that's going to make them feel even more anxious. That's sort of for us to deal with, not for our kids. But if you have an anxious kid who's asking questions like, what if, then I think the answer needs to be, you know what? We're not in control and we're going to do what we can. But at the end of the day, there's just something greater that's controlling this, and it's not me.
Last question, and if you're up for it, I'm definitely game for a follow-up, maybe next week or something, later. Social distancing does not mean isolation. It's a frustrating concept, as I've had all my friends in small group get-togethers, upcoming get-togethers, and even my in-laws saying, don't come over because we're following social distancing.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, says Josh, I want to feel safe. I want them to feel safe. I don't want to expose them, but social distancing is turning so quickly into social isolation. How do we not have social distancing turn into social isolation?
Yeah. So Josh, I don't know you, but you're saying you have in-laws, which I assume means you're married. So there's at least one person who probably, I hope, wants to connect with you and spend time with you. And I'll take that as a good sign. And you probably do have some friends you haven't spoken to in a while. I don't know if you're on Facebook, take a look at your friends list, send somebody a random note saying, hey, you know what? It's been like 4 years. I have a lot more time on my hands. Do you want to catch up? And send that note to 4 or 5 people tomorrow. I'm sure one of them at least, hopefully, will respond to you. Have a chat with them. Catch up with people. If people are being isolating from you, also you can still connect. I hope you can still connect with your in-laws through Zoom, or through Skype or whatever it is. I know it's frustrating. I feel it and I hear it. I think we need to accept the limits of what we're facing. It's just the new reality. Hopefully it'll be over soon. And in the interim, we have a great opportunity to practice acceptance.
Great. I'm just going to post a few more things here. Everybody, let's keep in touch. Happy to jump on a Zoom. Happy to be in touch. Schmooze. Waiting to hear from you, actually. And also, I'm going to put this link here, which is a sign-up link. If you'd like to join one of the groups, please definitely fill that out, and someone will hopefully reach out to you soon. Dr. Rosmarin, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We're really fortunate to have you part of this community, and now this greater digital community And thank you so much for making the time. Please thank your wife for us as well.
Sure.
And look forward to hopefully doing this again soon. And again, thank you so much. If anyone would like to have a recording of this, we hope to put this on the actual link, tribejournal.org/2020-3-16, today's date. So may we only hear good things. And friends, maybe we can regroup another time very soon, hopefully sometime next week or something. Please be in touch if that's something you're interested in. And we look forward to being in touch with you soon. All the best. May we hear only good things. And everyone stay safe and stay healthy. Sending a lot of love from J-Pulse and from the Center for Anxiety in New York and Boston. Wishing you only good things.